Alright, what we have here is the 60 gigabyte version of the Corsair solid state drive, the Force series, which is based off the SandForce controller. It's a pretty good controller that recently came out. This is a publicly available drive that you can find almost at any high-tech hardware store. And here's what the actual drive itself looks like. It's a 2.5-inch drive that is the size of a notebook hard drive, so it will fit in all notebooks. And it does come with a 3.5-inch bracket and screws so that you can put it into a desktop. So what we're about to demonstrate here is a clean install of Windows 7 Ultimate Edition. And you can see here the actual formatted capacity comes out to be about 55.9. Alright, so without further ado, let's see how long this whole installation process might take. So a little bit of background on SSDs. When these things first initially came out, they were fairly inconsistent in the sense that the drives would stutter based on the controller that you got, and basically the memory wasn't very reliable, and there was no way to really guarantee that the drive would wear evenly, as in the different sectors would write and read just in a reliable fashion that across the entire drive. So what you ended up with is part of the drive would burn out faster than other parts. So the design number of write cycles is about 1 million, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And the mean time before failure, I'm not exactly sure what that measurement means, but it's usually between 1 to 2 million hours. And a lot of small Windows system files certainly can go through just an enormous amount of read and write cycles because of the way Windows operates. So these are very different from your standard USB dumb drives in terms of memory quality and design even. So this latest edition of the Force series drive, it has the SandForce controller, which can supposedly read at 285 megabytes per second and write at 275 megabytes per second. And this is for sequential read and write, as if you're copying a movie, for example, from one medium to another. And when these type of drives were first introduced, they could only read and write at about maybe 150 megabytes and write at about maybe 30, and it was fairly inconsistent. And the other aspect of it was that it could read and like random seek, which is the key factor here. Is typically a mechanical hard drive can produce about maybe 150 different read operations, but an SSD, the first Intel SSDs were able to do almost 10,000 random read operations per second. So we're talking phenomenal differences. Now, where might you see this actual difference come into play? Typically during system boot up, when it's loading all the drivers, all the different system files. That's when you typically would see this difference. And of course there are some other cases that I can't think of off the top of my head. But normally on a mechanical hard drive, if you defragment the drive, the boot up time could significantly improve. Loading different files, loading different programs can significantly improve. But with an SSD, you are not supposed to defragment at all. In fact, in some cases, the more fragmented it is, the better the performance. For example, the Intel SSDs had 10 different channels going into all the memory. So if the data was actually spread out across the drive, it can actually make use of more channels to access the data. So just one classic example. And from what I've seen and heard is that with an SSD you can actually boot up in about as low as 7 seconds. And here we're about to explore that theory and explore all the myths here. And right now we're looking 5 minutes in, and it looks like we're maybe halfway done with actually installing Windows 7. So I'm just going to keep talking here. So OCZ recently introduced another SSD that was also fairly amusing. Instead of having the traditional serial ATA interface, it would use the PCI Express slot on your motherboard. Now the PCI Express slot would actually be just astronomically faster than a serial ATA port. And as if that weren't enough, they also put internal RAID 0 on the PCI Express card. And what that means is that there were actually two SandForce controller chips on the card itself, RAID 0 on the card. So it looks like we're done installing already, and it's only been 6 minutes. So there you have it. Now, compared to a Western Digital Raptor, which was considered the top drive in the day, this is just so many times more phenomenal. And I guess one last aspect that I forgot to mention is the seek time. Now, typically, hard drive manufacturers advertise something like 8.9 milliseconds for seek time. And typically, if you actually benchmark the drive, you'll find seek times probably double that, somewhere between 14 and 16 milliseconds. The Western Digital Raptor was, in a lot of cases, able to get it down to 4 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds, and 8 milliseconds typical. And just to give you an idea of what that might mean, just you moving your mouse and for it to respond across the screen, that could be 8 milliseconds. And so the SSDs, because there's no moving parts, the response time on them is literally 1/10 of a millisecond. And I guess the one other difference is that a mechanical hard drive will actually burn about 10 watts, whereas an SSD will burn sometimes 2 watts or less. And the Intel drives actually advertise as having burning only 1/7 of a watt during operation. Now, a laptop hard drive would typically burn 5 watts. What does this actually calculate to? You might actually end up getting an hour extra battery life. That's what it means. So for all practical purposes, an SSD has great potential for a laptop. It makes sense. They are shock-proof for the most part, and they are lightweight, and they burn almost no power. But for a desktop, we're really stepping over the boundaries of saying, depending on how big your wallet is. But here you have it. It's been 8 minutes or so, minus the boot time, and we're already here done with the Windows 7 install. Alright, that's a wrap, guys.